A while ago I created a video that covered 10 things that you should know as a PvP healer, and it covered pretty much every aspect of building and playing a healer, from classes and race to possible sets and even positioning. For this video I wanted to dive deeper into what's by now become a niche specialty of mine, which is healing in Ravenwatch, the non-proc server of Cyrodiil. Over the past few months I've played a bunch of different builds there and tested them on different classes, and over this period I've been able to optimize my performance to a point where I can be on top of my game no matter which group I'm in. While I occasionally play small scale on Ravenwatch, I prefer healing for groups of 6 or more players. This is because Ravenwatch EU is not the most suitable environment for small scaling, not to mention there's less need to bring a fully spec'd healer to a small scale group, as opposed to yet another tanky warden or hybrid nightblade. This means that for this video I will talk about healing for any group that's bigger than a small scale. I've healed in 8 different guilds, and although those have ranged from casual guilds to semi-organized groups to high-end ball groups, my setup has been pretty much the same for all of them. Much of the information I gave in my other video will still be relevant here, such as race, positioning, tracking your performance, etc. For this video I will focus more on what specific gear to use in the Ravenwatch campaign, as well as key skills and other build specifics such as food and potions. If you want more general information, go and watch my other video. Since we're in a no-proc campaign, our gear choice is pretty limited. We don't have the typical support sets you would run in another campaign, such as Spell Power Cure. Instead, we're going to look at sets that directly boost our healing and sustain while reaching the required amount of survivability. The most important stats of our build will be Healing Done and Spell and Weapon Damage. Healing Done kind of speaks for itself. The more healing we do as a healer, the better. Spell and weapon damage may not seem as important on the surface, but since a lot of our healing skills scale off of this damage, having a good amount of spell and weapon damage will increase the ticks of our healing. In other words, our heals will hit for way harder and our healing output will go up by a lot. With all that in mind, the first set I would recommend to everyone is Heartland Conqueror. It's a crafted set that boosts our weapon traits, and in our setup this means that we'll have more spell damage and more healing done. There aren't many other non-proc sets that directly boost our healing skills like this. There's Healer's Habit, which gives us extra healing done, as well as a permanent access to Minor Mending, but I used this set a lot in the past and it just didn't give me the same numbers as Heartland Conqueror. This is doubly true for classes such as Templar and Nightblade, which already have pretty reliable access to the Minor Mending buff through their own class skills. There's also Order's Wrath, which boosts critical healing, but a crit build requires you to make a lot of different choices in terms of weapon types, armor weight and Mundus stones. Choices that you normally wouldn't make on a healer. You can definitely make it function, but I've tried it and it ended up giving me a lot less healing compared to Heartland Conqueror. In addition to Heartland Conqueror, we're gonna want a sustain set. It should be obvious why it's important to have sustain. Healers should keep up their skills at all times during combat, and the more sustain you have, the easier this becomes. But there's another advantage. If we get a lot of sustain through one of our sets, we do not have to waste so many jewelry enchantments on adding sustain. Instead, we can go for 2 or even 3 damage glyphs, so enchantments that increase our spell and weapon damage, and with that our healing power. I often see that players use Armor of the Seducer, but this set only benefits our Magicka sustain. Since hybridization became a thing, healers also have to take care of their stamina sustain. In addition to the core combat costs such as Break Free and Dodge Roll, we now also have Echoing Vigor, a stamina heal over time, and a bunch of other class-specific skills. On my sorcerer I use no fewer than 3 stamina skills, so a set that just boosts my Magicka sustain isn't going to cut it. For as far as I'm concerned, we have 3 options for sustain sets in Ravenwatch. Eternal Vigor gives us the most overall Magicka and stamina sustain, making it arguably the best choice, but only by a bit. The disadvantage of Eternal Vigor is that if you go below 50% HP, you will get health recovery instead. This isn't very useful if you are taking heavy pressure and you're trying to keep your skills up. This shouldn't happen too much as a healer, but it's still something to be aware of. Playing with Eternal Vigor usually allows me to play with 3 damage glyphs on my jewelry. Amber Pleasant gives fewer recoveries than Eternal Vigor does, but it does keep the same effects regardless of your HP, so it's a bit more stable. Another advantage is that it has several other non-sustain related bonuses, slightly boosting your spell damage, maximum magicka and your crit chance. So while I tend to use 2 damage glyphs on an Ember Plasm setup and 1 magicka recovery glyph, my healing tooltips are almost the same when compared to Eternal Vigor. The one area where Eternal Vigor clearly wins with the way I set up my healer is Stamina Sustain. It should be easy to get above 1300 base stamina recovery, which is pretty amazing for a healer. On the flip side, I do have a slightly lower magicka pool with Eternal Vigor, which can be tricky on classes with expensive skills. This makes Ember Plasm the most stable all-around choice. Willow's Path is the third sustain set that'll get the job done in Ravenwatch, although I do consider it inferior to both Eternal Vigor and Ember Plasm. Some of the set's recovery bonuses work based on a percentage rather than raw numbers, making it a bit tricky to pin down its exact output, as it depends on your base sustain. But just looking at the way I set up my healer, it gives me the least sustain overall, and it provides no other benefits like Ember Plasm does. The only advantage Willow's Path has is that it's craftable, allowing you to choose to wait. But since we already have access to one other crafted set with Heartland Conqueror, we don't really need that to set up the healer exactly the way we want to. With Heartland Conqueror plus our sustain set of choice, we end up with 2 full sets that need to be active on both bars. This leaves us with space for 1 mythic and a single piece of armor. The best option for a mythic is the Ring of Mark and Majesty, as it gives us extra spell and weapon damage, as well as added resistances. You could use Wild Hunt, but since we can make ourselves fast in other ways, it is not really needed for our build. For the final piece of armor, we go with a 1-piece monster set that boosts our healing, such as Symphony of Blades or Earthcore. The few full monster sets that do work on Ravenwatch are of no use to us, so this is the best option. Since we have at least one crafted set, we can choose the exact weight distribution of our armor. In most cases I would go for 5 medium armor. Why? Because the passes are the most useful to our build. First of all, we get more weapon and spell damage, which is one of the foundations of our build. We also get more speed, which is very useful since we don't have access to the Celerity champion point on Ravenwatch. And we get a good amount of base stamina sustain, which in combination with our sustain set allows us not to worry about this important part of our build at all. It will also allow us to run a different food type than Jewels of Misrule or Smoked Bear Haunch. Another advantage is that this allows us to get a major evasion buff on any class, as we'll have access to Shuffle. So to the 5 pieces of medium armor, we add 1 piece of heavy armor and 1 piece of light armor, and we're set. The chest should be the heavy armor piece, and I always make the waist piece the light one. There are exceptions to this. For example, on Nightblade, the duration of our major resolve through Refreshing Path is tied to the number of heavy pieces we wear. So on Nightblade I would go for something more balanced, like 3 heavy, 3 medium and 1 light. In the end, you can play with any weight distribution and still have good results, but when I went from 5 light to 5 medium, I really noticed a positive impact on every aspect of my healing. For weapons, it is simple. On our front bar we go with dual wield swords. Even after their slight nerf, we get a good bonus to our spell damage, which means that any skill we activate on this bar will heal for more than if we had a restoration staff. Of course, we do still need a restoration staff for the skills tied to that skill bar, as well as getting back magicka and activating major mending through our heavy attacks. So our back bar is a restoration staff. Can you play with double resto bars? Absolutely, but you will heal for less. Can you play with a sword and board back bar? Absolutely, but you will heal for even less. For the traits on our weapons, I've tried a lot of different things, but this is what gave me the most healing. On our dual wield bar, the main hand is Nirnhound and the offhand is powered. On our restoration staff bar, we have powered. For armor traits, we have a bit more wiggle room. One thing I'd always do is put the reinforced trait on the heavy chest. Then for the other pieces, I would always have between 3 and 5 pieces of impenetrable and the rest divines. Well fitted can be a decent option, but we should already have good stam sustain, and as a healer you shouldn't need to roll dodge across the battlefield in any case. Sturdy is often recommended but not very useful, because if you find yourself in a position where you constantly need to hold block on a healer, you are probably standing in the wrong place. Finally, jewelry traits. I play with 2 pieces of swift jewelry and 1 piece of infused jewelry. Along with our medium armor, this gives us a good amount of speed. The only exception is Sorcerer, where I play with 3 pieces of infused jewelry. On that class I don't need the speed boost because I already have Minor Expedition from the Hurricane skill. In combination with Streak or Ball of Lightning, this gives me all the mobility I need to position myself effectively. Our Mundus choice is simple, the Ritual. We already have enough sustain, so we won't need to bother with the Atronach. The specific attributes you want will depend on your race and your class, but for Ravenwatch I will usually go for above 30k HP with my food buff active, and I invest the rest into Magicka, which leads to a Magicka pool of around 22 to 23k. Usually this means that you'll have to invest about 30 to 40 points into health and put the remaining ones into Magicka. Make sure you have access to the Undaunted passive to slightly boost your stats. For food we will use Ozorga's Red Frothgar. It gives us a lot of Magicka recovery as well as a lot of HP. Combined with our medium armor and our sustain set, this puts us in the clear in terms of our sustain, so we can tweak the rest of our build towards boosting our healing. For our potions, we'll either use the common tri-stat potions or immovability potions for big pushes. I sometimes use spell power potions on classes that do not have easy access to major sorcery and brutality. The skills we'll use will of course depend on the class, but here are a few essential skills that every healer should consider. Echoing Vigor, which is the best heal over time in the game. Radiating Regeneration, another great heal over time even after its nerf. Healing Springs, a decent ground heal that also boosts our sustain. Blessing of Restoration, the main burst heal on many classes. The only exceptions are Templars who use Ritual of Retribution and Wardens who use Enchanted Growth. Shuffle, a snare removal skill that gives major evasion, limiting our incoming AoE damage. It's essential for semi-organized groups and ball groups. The exception is Nightblade, which uses Phantasmal Escape instead. Race Against Time, a snare removal that also gives major expedition. I usually slot this instead of Shuffle if I'm playing with a more casual group and can position myself more freely on the battlefield. Inner Light, a passive skill that grants you major prophecy, increasing your critical rating. If you do not have class access to this like Wardens do with Lotus Bloom, put this on a bar with your main burst heal. Barrier, a good ultimate to use preemptively when pushing or as a last resort when getting pushed. Note that it only applies to players who are in your group and relatively close to you. Degeneration, a non-ideal but still effective way to gain access to major sorcery and brutality. Use this if your class has no native access to this essential buff and there is no Dragonknight around to give it to you. With all that said, this is what my skill bars look like on every class. I won't go over them in detail as it would make the video twice as long, but I might release separate videos looking more closely at specific classes. I also have a video on my Templar healer already. Mind that these skill bars may differ depending on the context. As I said before, if you don't have a Dragonknight in your group, on some classes you might need Degeneration for major brutality. Or in some groups, the speed of Race Against Time might benefit you more than the major evasion of Shuffle. And that's it. That's how I built my healers on the Ravenwatch campaign, and it has brought me a lot of success over the past few months. Feel free to take these build tips and tweak them as you see fit, and let me know how it goes in the comments, and also feel free to ask any questions. And just to help you process all of the information I've shared in this video, I will end it by sharing with you what the full builds look like on my Sorcerer and my Templar, respectively.